Arman Malik was known as the world's richest billionaire CEO. His face often appeared on magazine covers, his name was written in newspapers, and television anchors spoke about his business success almost every day. People admired his story of hard work and discipline, and many dreamed of living the kind of life he had. To the world, he seemed like the perfect man, powerful, wealthy, and untouchable. But behind the tall glass walls of his office and inside his grand mansion, Arman lived in silence. His success had come at a heavy cost. He had no family to return to at night. Years of chasing money had distanced him from friends, and the people around him now only cared about his wealth. Every smile he saw seemed fake. Every handshake felt like a business deal. At 50 years old, Arman had everything money could buy: luxury cars, private jets, houses across the world, but inside his heart, he felt empty. Each night he sat by the wide window of his penthouse, staring at the city lights below, wondering what the meaning of his life truly was. He often remembered his younger days, when he lived in a small house with his parents. His father worked in a shop, and his mother cooked simple meals. Those days were hard, but there had been laughter, warmth, and love in that home. Now, with billions in his bank account, Arman could buy the entire neighborhood where he grew up, yet he could not buy the peace of those days. One evening, after a long meeting filled with numbers, charts, and endless arguments, Arman dismissed his staff earlier than usual. He asked his driver to drop him near the old streets of the city where he rarely went. He wanted to walk alone, away from the cameras, away from the flashing lights of his reputation. The streets were different from the polished business district. Small shops sold tea, children played barefoot, and the smell of fried food filled the air. The place reminded him of where he had come from. He walked slowly, blending in, keeping his face half hidden with a cap. As he crossed a corner, his eyes fell on a little girl sitting by the roadside. Her clothes were old and torn, and she had no shoes. A small blanket covered her shoulders, though it did little against the evening wind. She was not begging like others he had seen. Instead, she was holding a broken notebook and scribbling something with a tiny pencil, humming softly to herself. Arman paused. Something about her presence caught his attention. People walked by, ignoring her, but she seemed lost in her small world of writing and humming. He stepped closer. "What are you writing?" he asked gently. The girl looked up with wide brown eyes, startled for a moment, then smiled shyly. "Stories," she replied. "I like to make stories about people. It makes me happy." Her voice was soft, yet full of innocence. Arman's heart stirred. "And why are you sitting here?" She shrugged lightly. "I don't have a home. I stay where I can. Sometimes here, sometimes near the market. But it's okay. I still have my stories." Those words pierced through Arman more deeply than he expected. Here was a little girl, homeless and hungry, yet she spoke of happiness with more truth than he had felt in years. He studied her face, the dirt on her cheeks, the thinness of her arms, and yet her eyes carried a light he could not explain. "What's your name?" he asked. "Meher," she said, clutching her broken notebook to her chest. Arman nodded slowly. "Do you eat anything?" "Sometimes," she replied simply, as if hunger was not a stranger to her. Arman felt a strange heaviness in his chest. For years, his board members and employees had spoken to him about profits, losses, mergers, and markets. But this little girl, with no shoes and no roof, spoke of stories and happiness. It was as if life was showing him a reflection of what he had lost. That night, Arman could not sleep. The image of Meher sitting by the roadside returned again and again to his mind. Her smile, her words, and her strength shook him in ways he had never imagined. For the first time in years, he felt that his wealth was meaningless if children like her had no shelter, no food, and no support. The billionaire, who had once thought he had lost all hope, found himself thinking about a small homeless girl and her broken notebook. He did not know why, but something inside him whispered that she was about to change his life forever. The next morning, Armin sat in his office, staring at the large screen filled with numbers and reports. His managers spoke, but their words floated past him like meaningless sounds. Charts showed rising profits, graphs climbed higher, and yet none of it stirred his heart. Instead, his mind replayed the image of the little girl, Meher, sitting by the roadside with her broken notebook. For years, he had lived inside this office surrounded by glass, steel, and endless responsibilities. But now, those walls felt like a cage. His mind drifted to the way she smiled while talking about her stories. A child who had nothing, and yet, she still had hope. Armin wondered, when had he lost his own? After the meeting ended, Armin dismissed his team quickly and sat in silence. The city stretched before him through the window, tall buildings shining under the sun. He could buy any of those towers, yet he could not buy peace. He tapped his fingers on the desk, then suddenly stood up. He knew what he wanted to do. That evening, he asked his driver to take him back to the same street. The driver looked surprised but obeyed without a question. Armin wore simple clothes and a plain cap, not wanting anyone to recognize him. As the car stopped at the corner, he stepped out and walked slowly. There she was. Meher sat in the same place, hugging her notebook, her little feet bare on the cold ground. She was humming again, lost in her own world. Armin walked closer. "Hello, Meher," he said softly. Her eyes brightened with recognition. "You came back," she said, smiling wide. Armin felt his heart warm at her excitement. He sat on the stone edge beside her, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. "Yes, I came back. I wanted to see what story you are writing today." She opened the notebook carefully, showing him pages filled with uneven letters, some words misspelled, some lines crossed out. But the effort was clear. "It's about a man who lives in a big palace," she explained, her eyes sparkling. "He is very rich, but very lonely. Then one day, he meets a little bird who sings for him, and suddenly he doesn't feel alone anymore." Armin's breath caught in his chest. The story felt like it was about him. "And what happens then?" he asked gently. Meher smiled. "The man learns that the bird is small, but her song makes the palace feel alive. He realizes that happiness comes from love, not from gold." For a moment, Armin couldn't speak. He looked at her thin face, her innocent eyes, and wondered how she understood such deep truths at such a young age. "Meher," he asked softly, "do you go to school?" Her smile faded. She shook her head. "I wanted to, but I don't have money for books or uniform. Sometimes I watch children from far when they go. I wish I could learn properly." Armin felt a lump rise in his throat. This little girl, with so much wisdom and imagination, was living on the streets with no education. It was unfair. It was wrong. He clenched his fist silently, feeling anger not at her but at himself for being blind to such realities while he lived in endless luxury. "Would you like to go to school if you had a chance?" he asked carefully. Her face lit up instantly. "Yes. More than anything," she exclaimed, her small voice filled with hope. Armin nodded slowly, hiding the emotions burning inside him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a chocolate bar he had asked his assistant to bring earlier. He handed it to her. "For now, have this. Tomorrow, I will come again." Meher accepted it with both hands, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, as if it was the greatest treasure. That night, Armin returned to his mansion, but the rooms felt colder than ever. He wandered through the wide halls, his footsteps echoing. Every wall was decorated with art, every table held priceless antiques, but none of it touched his heart. For the first time, he realized how empty his wealth truly was. He sat by the window, staring at the city lights again. But tonight, something was different. The memory of Meher's smile filled his heart, her story about the lonely man and the bird echoing in his ears. He felt a strange warmth, a reason to wake up the next day. For years, he had thought his life had no meaning beyond making money. But now, a little girl with a broken notebook had shown him that happiness could still exist even in the darkest places. As he closed his eyes, Armin whispered to himself, maybe she is the reason I needed. The next day, the sky was heavy with clouds, and the city streets glistened from a light drizzle. Armin looked out of his office window, watching raindrops run down the glass. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not about meetings, profits, or business deals. Instead, they were about Meher, the little homeless girl with a broken notebook. He remembered her words about wishing to go to school, about stories that brought her happiness. Something inside him had awakened. He no longer wanted to sit in his office all day while children like her sat on the streets. He wanted to do something real, something meaningful. As the rain grew heavier, Armin took his coat and left the office early. His driver looked surprised again but drove him without a question to the same street. Armin's heart pounded softly as the car slowed down near the familiar corner. There she was. Even in the rain, Meher sat curled up with her thin blanket, trying to keep her notebook dry. Drops of water fell on her small head, but she did not move. Instead, she continued writing, her pencil scratching against the wet paper. Armin quickly stepped out with an umbrella and walked to her side. Meher, he called. She looked up, her eyes brightening at the sight of him. You came again, she said with joy. He opened the umbrella over her and sat down beside her on the cold stone. I told you I would. He gently looked at the notebook in her hand. The pages were damp, but her determination was stronger. You should not sit here in the rain. You will fall sick. Meher shrugged lightly. I don't have any other place. This is where I stay. Those words pierced through Armin's heart. He stared at her for a moment, then spoke with a deep seriousness. Meher, listen to me. You are not going to stay like this forever. I promise you, I will help you go to school. I will help you write stories in real notebooks, with real pens. You deserve more than this street. Her little eyes widened, almost not believing him. Really? You would do that? Yes, Armin said firmly. It will not be easy, but I have the means. I will take care of it. But you must promise me one thing: you will never stop writing your stories. A smile spread across her face, brighter than the rain-soaked sky above them. She nodded quickly. I promise. Armin felt a strange warmth inside, a feeling he had not experienced in decades. It was as if a piece of his own lost childhood was coming back through her. He took a small packet from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a new notebook, thick with clean white pages, and a set of colored pencils. Meher gasped, her tiny hands trembling as she held it. This is for me. Yes, he said softly. For your stories. She hugged the notebook tightly to her chest, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Armin quickly looked away, blinking back his own tears. For years, he had given millions to charity organizations, but it had always been through signatures and numbers, never directly, never with his own heart. This, he realized, was different. This was personal. Just then, a shopkeeper nearby walked up and looked at them curiously. Sir, the man said, she has been here for many months. People pass by, but no one pays attention. You seem to care for her. Are you her guardian? Armin hesitated. The word guardian struck something deep within him. He had no children of his own. He had never been a father, never cared for anyone beyond his empire of money. But looking at Meher, clutching her notebook with such happiness, he felt something change. "Yes," he finally said, his voice firm. "From today, I will be her guardian." The shopkeeper nodded with respect and walked away. Meher looked at Armin with wide eyes. "Does that mean, you will stay in my life?" she asked softly. Armin smiled gently. "Yes, Meher. I will not leave you. You are not alone anymore." The rain continued to fall around them, but beneath the umbrella, a new bond was formed, a bond stronger than wealth, stronger than loneliness. For the first time in years, Armin felt alive, and Meher felt safe. That night, Armin returned to his mansion once again. But this time, it did not feel as empty. As he placed his coat on the chair, he saw the raindrops still clinging to its fabric and smiled faintly. For years, his life had been about building towers of glass and steel, but today, in the rain, he had started building something else: hope. He sat by the window as usual, looking at the glowing city. But instead of emptiness, his heart carried a new vision, a little girl in a torn dress, holding a notebook and smiling through the rain. And for the first time, Armin Malik whispered to himself, "Maybe this is just the beginning." The cabin was silent, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of fear. The plane had steadied for a moment, but the tension in the air was heavy. Daniel could feel the unease ripple through every passenger. Mothers held their children closer. Some people whispered prayers. Others stared at the floor, pretending to be calm though their trembling hands betrayed them. Daniel sat straight, his eyes fixed on the curtain that led to the cockpit. He knew something was wrong, and he also knew that silence and half-truths from the crew would only make the situation worse. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed again. The captain's voice returned, but this time it was uneven, almost shaky. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are, experiencing some technical issues with the system. We are working to fix it. Please stay calm and remain seated." The words were supposed to comfort, but instead they cracked open the fear. Passengers exchanged worried glances. A man 2 rows ahead muttered, "The pilot doesn't sound steady. What's going on?" Daniel noticed it too. The tone, the hesitation, it was not the voice of someone in full control. He had heard voices like that before, in meetings where managers froze under pressure. He had seen strong plans collapse because of weak hearts. And now, thousands of feet above the ground, it was happening again. Daniel unbuckled his seat belt slowly. The woman beside him looked alarmed. "Where are you going?" she whispered. He gave her a calm smile. "To do what must be done." He stood up and walked down the narrow aisle. Flight attendants hurried toward him, their faces filled with nervous authority. "Sir, please return to your seat," one of them said. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "I need to speak with the captain." "Sir, that's not possible," she replied, blocking his way. Daniel lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Listen carefully. I know fear when I hear it. Your captain is afraid. If he cannot lead, someone must. You want to keep this cabin safe? Then take me to him. Now." The flight attendant froze. She saw something in his eyes, not anger, not arrogance, but authority. Quiet, steady authority. She hesitated, then whispered, "Wait here." She disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Daniel standing firm. Passengers watched with curiosity. Some whispered, others stared. Moments later, the curtain opened, and the attendant gestured for Daniel to come. He stepped inside, crossing into the space that few passengers ever saw. The cockpit door stood ahead. When it opened, Daniel saw the pilot inside, his hands trembling slightly over the controls. The co-pilot sat stiffly, trying to stay calm but clearly shaken too. Alarms blinked on the panel, and the sound of beeping filled the small room. Daniel stepped in. "Captain," he said gently, "may I speak with you?" The pilot turned, his face pale. "Who are you?" "You can't be here." Daniel raised a hand. "I am Daniel, CEO of Eastway Global. My company employs thousands. Every day I make decisions that decide futures. I know what it means to lead under pressure. Right now, your passengers need calm, and so do you." The captain's lips parted, but no words came. His hands trembled again as another alarm beeped. Daniel placed a hand on the back of his chair. "Tell me what's happening. Speak clearly." The co-pilot answered quietly. "There's a system fault. The navigation screen keeps flashing errors. We're high enough, but if it doesn't stabilize, landing could be dangerous. The captain is trying to reset it." Daniel studied the pilot's face. Fear was written there, fear of failure, fear of responsibility. He had seen that look before, in men who carried weight too heavy for their hearts. Daniel leaned closer, his voice calm and firm. "Captain, listen to me. You have trained for this moment. Your passengers believe in you. But belief cannot live in hesitation. You must choose now: calm, steady, strong. Or you will lose more than this flight. You will lose yourself." The cockpit was silent except for the alarms. Daniel's words hung heavy in the air. The pilot took a deep breath, his shaking hands slowly steadied. His eyes lifted to the controls again, clearer this time. He nodded slightly. "You're right," he whispered. Daniel gave a small nod in return. "Good. Now, tell the passengers the truth. Give them strength. Do not hide fear, replace it with courage." The captain hesitated again, then reached for the intercom. His voice, though still strained, was stronger now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a system error, but we are managing it. The crew is trained, and I assure you we are doing everything possible to ensure a safe flight. Please remain calm. We will keep you updated." Back in the cabin, Daniel could almost feel the shift. Passengers still looked anxious, but the tone of honesty calmed them more than vague reassurances. Truth had power. Daniel placed a hand on the captain's shoulder. "Remember this moment. Leadership is not about avoiding storms, it is about guiding others through them." The pilot nodded, his breath steadier. Daniel stepped back from the cockpit, ready to return to his seat. But deep down he knew this was not the end. The system alarms were still flashing. The danger had not passed. As he walked down the aisle, passengers looked at him with new eyes. Some nodded in silent gratitude, though they did not yet know who he was. To them, he was just a calm man who dared to step forward when fear ruled the air. Daniel sat back in his cramped seat, folded his hands, and whispered again the words of his mother, "Keep your head high." The next minutes would decide everything. And Daniel was ready. The plane glided high above the clouds, but inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension. The passengers had heard the captain's announcement, and while it sounded steadier than before, the blinking lights and sudden jolts reminded everyone that danger was not gone. Daniel sat quietly in his narrow seat, but his mind was alert. He had seen enough in the cockpit to know the situation was serious. The system alarms were not calming down. If they worsened, the entire flight could be at risk. Beside him, the woman with the headphones leaned closer. "You were in there, weren't you? In the cockpit?" Daniel turned his head slowly. "Yes." "What's happening?" she whispered nervously. Daniel gave her a calm smile. "The crew is working on a system fault. It is difficult, but they are handling it. The best thing we can do is remain calm." She nodded, though her hands trembled. His words carried weight, not because they solved the problem, but because they gave her something steady to hold onto. Suddenly, the plane shook again, harder than before. Gasps filled the cabin. A few people cried out. The overhead bins rattled, and a baby began to scream. The man across the aisle stood up in panic. "We're going to crash." "I knew it," he shouted. His fear spread like fire. The flight attendants rushed to calm him, but the passengers' voices grew louder. Some demanded answers. Some prayed. The sense of order was slipping away. Daniel stood. His tall figure caught the attention of many eyes at once. He raised his hand gently. "Please," he said in a firm but steady tone, "remain calm. Fear will not help us. Trust the process. Trust the people who are working for your safety." His voice cut through the chaos like a calm wave against a storm. The man sat back down, still shaking but quieter now. The passengers around him looked at Daniel, their faces filled with both fear and hope. Daniel sat again, his own heart beating faster. Leadership was not only about solving problems. It was also about holding people together until the solution arrived. Minutes later, the flight attendant returned to him. She leaned down and whispered, "The captain asked if you could come back to the cockpit. He wants your presence." Daniel nodded and rose again. Passengers watched as he walked down the aisle, some whispering as if they already knew he was more than just another traveler. When Daniel entered the cockpit, he saw the captain wiping sweat from his forehead. The co-pilot was focused, pressing buttons, but the alarm still blinked. "We can't clear it," the co-pilot muttered. "The system keeps resetting, then failing again." Daniel stepped closer. "What does this mean for the landing?" The captain swallowed hard. "It means if it doesn't stabilize, landing could be rough, dangerous even. And we can't keep circling forever. Fuel is not unlimited." Daniel felt the weight of the words. Hundreds of lives, families, dreams, all depending on decisions made in this small room. He placed a steady hand on the captain's shoulder. "Listen to me. You are not alone. You have a team. You have your co-pilot. And you have me." The captain looked at him, confused. "But you're a passenger." Daniel's eyes were firm. "I am more than that. I am a leader. And right now, you need one beside you who will not break under fear. Let me help you keep steady." The captain stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. His shoulders lowered slightly, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Daniel glanced at the co-pilot. "Keep doing what you must. And captain, speak to your passengers again. Not with fear, not with hesitation. Speak with courage. They will follow your voice." The captain hesitated, but Daniel's steady presence gave him strength. He lifted the microphone again, his voice firmer this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are still working on the system fault. I assure you, we are prepared for every outcome. Your safety is our highest duty. Stay calm, and trust that we will land this plane with care." In the cabin, Daniel could hear the response. The noise softened. Passengers still looked afraid, but the panic began to fade. Daniel knew the next steps would be crucial. He turned back to the captain. "Now, make your plan. Decide how and where you will land. Uncertainty is your enemy. Clarity will guide you." The captain nodded, breathing deeper now. He looked at the co-pilot. "Check alternate airports. We may need to divert." Daniel stepped back slightly, allowing them to work. He did not touch the controls. He did not act like he knew more than them. Instead, he stood like a pillar in the room, steady and unshaken. He thought of his mother again. Her words, "Son, one day you will sit where they say you cannot." He smiled faintly. How true those words were. He had been denied a first-class seat, yet now he stood in the cockpit, the most important seat of all. As the alarms continued to flash, Daniel whispered under his breath, "If dignity is denied, take responsibility instead. That is the higher place." The co-pilot announced, "Nearest airport is within 40 minutes. If the system holds, we can reach it. But if it worsens," the captain's voice steadied. "Then we land wherever we must. We do not risk lives." Daniel nodded, approving the clarity. He knew decisions like this defined true leadership. Back in the cabin, passengers waited with anxious faces. Some glanced at the cockpit door, sensing that inside, someone had risen to lead beyond titles and uniforms. The flight was not safe yet. The danger still lingered in every flashing alarm. But Daniel had planted something stronger than fear. He had planted courage. And courage, once lit, could carry them through the storm. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but every beep from the cockpit's control panel echoed like thunder in Daniel's ears. The co-pilot kept scanning the screens, typing commands, but the red lights blinked stubbornly. The system fault refused to clear. The captain sat straighter now, no longer trembling as before, but his jaw was tight. He knew the truth: the plane could not continue forever like this. A decision had to be made soon. Daniel stood behind them, steady and calm. He didn't touch the controls, but his presence felt like an anchor in the storm. His voice, low and firm, broke the silence. "Captain, you must prepare both your crew and your passengers. Fear will not help when the time comes. Only readiness will." The captain nodded slowly. "You're right." He pressed the intercom again, this time speaking with more clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are diverting to a nearby airport. We may experience difficulties during landing, but I assure you that every step is being taken with your safety in mind. Please listen to the crew and follow instructions." Back in the cabin, passengers exchanged nervous looks. But instead of panic, a quiet strength spread among them. The attendants repeated safety instructions, guiding people calmly. The effect of Daniel's earlier leadership was still alive. His courage had softened their fear. Daniel returned to the cabin for a moment, walking down the aisle. People turned their heads, watching him. Some whispered, "That's the man who spoke with the captain." A few even reached out to touch his arm as if his steadiness could pass into them. The woman with headphones asked softly, "Will we be safe?" Daniel bent slightly so she could hear. "We will land. And when we do, you will tell your family that you saw courage today. Hold on to that." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled faintly and nodded. As Daniel returned toward the cockpit, the plane jolted again, harder than before. Luggage rattled above, and a sharp gasp spread through the cabin. One of the overhead bins popped open, and a bag tumbled into the aisle. A child cried loudly, and his mother struggled to calm him. Daniel picked up the bag, placed it aside, and crouched down to the child. "Brave one," he said gently, "look outside. See those clouds? They are soft like pillows. We are flying through them together." The boy hiccuped through his tears and peered out the window. Daniel smiled. "That's right. And soon, we'll land and tell the story of the night we flew through the pillows of the sky." The boy giggled faintly, and his mother mouthed, "Thank you." Daniel stood again and returned to the cockpit, where the tension had only thickened. The co-pilot turned, his voice strained. "Sir, the system is unstable. If it fails completely, the instruments will not guide us. We'll have to depend on manual landing." Daniel's eyes moved between them. "Then prepare for manual landing now. Do not wait for failure. Decide before it decides for you." The captain inhaled deeply. His eyes, once clouded with fear, now held determination. "You're right. We prepare now." For the next few minutes, Daniel stood silently as the captain and co-pilot ran through their procedures, calling out instructions, checking controls. The alarm still blinked, but their voices grew stronger, more united. Daniel whispered to himself, "Leadership is not about knowing everything. It is about giving others the strength to act." Finally, the captain spoke into the intercom one last time before descent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching the airport. Please fasten your seat belts and follow all instructions from the crew. Stay calm. We are ready." The plane began its descent. The engines roared louder as the nose tilted downward. Outside the window, faint city lights appeared below, shimmering like tiny sparks of hope. But the turbulence worsened. The plane shuddered violently, and passengers gasped. Some screamed. The attendants struggled to stay steady. Daniel moved to the center of the cabin. He raised his voice, not loud, but strong enough for many to hear. "Listen to me. We are together. Trust the crew. Trust the process. Keep faith, and keep calm. Look around, you see each other. We are not alone in this." The words spread through the rows like a wave. Passengers grabbed each other's hands. Some closed their eyes and breathed deeply. Fear was still there, but now it was joined by something stronger: unity. Back in the cockpit, the runway lights came into view. The co-pilot called out numbers. Altitude dropping, approach steady, but controls stiff. The captain's voice was calm. "I have it. Hold steady." Daniel stood near the cockpit door, his eyes locked on the captain. He did not interfere. He only whispered, "You can do this. You are stronger than the storm." The plane dipped lower, lower still. The runway lights grew brighter. Passengers held their breath. The first wheels touched the ground with a heavy jolt. The plane bounced, lifted slightly, then slammed down again. Gasps filled the cabin. The brakes screeched. The cabin shook as the aircraft fought against its own momentum. Daniel gripped the seat beside him, his body steady as stone. He whispered again, "Steady, steady." The plane roared down the runway, slowing bit by bit, until finally, after what felt like an eternity, it came to a stop. Silence filled the cabin. Not the silence of fear this time, but of relief. Then, all at once, cheers and cries broke out. Passengers hugged one another, tears streaming down their faces. The captain's voice came over the intercom, filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely. Thank you for your courage." Daniel sat quietly, his eyes closing for a brief moment. He breathed deeply, remembering his mother's words once more. "Son, one day you will sit where they say you cannot. And when you do, keep your head high." He smiled faintly. He had been denied first class. Yet here he was, the man who stood in the cockpit, the man who helped steady an entire plane. But this journey was not finished. A greater truth was still waiting to unfold. And soon, the world would know it. The plane sat still on the runway, its engines humming low as emergency lights flickered outside. Inside, passengers clapped, cried, and held each other. Relief washed over the cabin like a wave. They had landed. They were safe. But Daniel remained quiet. He knew the landing had been rough, almost too close to disaster. His eyes moved back to the cockpit, where the captain leaned against his seat, wiping sweat from his forehead. The co-pilot still stared at the blinking screens, shaken but silent. Daniel rose from his seat and walked calmly to the front. The passengers parted for him, some patting his shoulder, some whispering words of gratitude. They didn't know who he truly was, but they felt his strength. At the cockpit door, Daniel paused. The captain looked up, his face pale and weary. "Sir," Daniel said evenly, "may I come in?" The captain nodded weakly. Daniel stepped inside. The alarms had stopped, but the room still carried the heaviness of fear. "You landed the plane," Daniel began, "and for that, lives were saved. But let us be clear, your fear almost cost those lives before you found your courage." The captain swallowed hard, unable to meet his eyes. I did my best." Daniel's voice remained steady but firm. Your best cannot shake when hundreds of lives depend on you. A leader must be calm, clear, and ready. Tonight, you were not. Silence filled the cockpit. The co-pilot lowered his head. Daniel continued, his words carrying weight. 12 minutes into this flight, I saw your fear. You were not steady. I stood here to hold you together because you could not hold yourself. That is not acceptable for a man in your seat. The captain's hands trembled again. Who are you to say this? Daniel's eyes met his. I am Daniel, CEO of Eastway Global Airlines. The captain's face froze in shock. Even the co-pilot lifted his head quickly, his eyes wide. Daniel's tone did not change. Yes. This is my airline. These are my passengers. And tonight, I was forced to step into the place you should have filled. I was denied dignity at the counter, denied my rightful seat, but I still carried myself with calm. You, Captain, had the seat of command, yet you almost lost control. The captain's mouth opened, but no words came. He understood the weight of what had just been spoken. Daniel stood taller. As of this moment, I am grounding you. You will not fly again until you are retrained and cleared by my board. Lives cannot be risked by a man who hesitates in the storm. The co-pilot nodded slightly, as if silently agreeing. The captain lowered his head, shame washing over him. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder, not cruelly, but with firm truth. You are not fired from life, but from duty. Take this as a chance to rebuild. Fear does not end you, but it must teach you. The captain closed his eyes and whispered, Yes, sir. Daniel turned and stepped back into the cabin. The passengers watched him, sensing something important had happened. He faced them, his voice strong and clear. My friends, he said, tonight, we faced fear together. Some moments felt impossible. But we are here, safe, because courage is stronger than fear. The passengers nodded, their eyes fixed on him. Daniel continued, You do not know me, so I will tell you now. I am Daniel, CEO of this airline. I was denied my first-class seat tonight, but that does not matter. What matters is this: dignity is not in a seat. It is in how you rise when others fall. Tonight, you all rose with me. You stayed strong, and because of that, we made it through. Tears glistened in some eyes. A man in the back shouted, Thank you. Others clapped, their applause filling the cabin. Daniel raised his hand gently to calm them. Remember this night not as one of fear, but of courage. Remember that leadership is not about comfort, but about responsibility. And wherever you go after this, carry that strength with you. The passengers stood, applauding him now, some with tears streaming down their faces. For them, this was not just a flight. It had become a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. As the applause faded, Daniel returned to his seat. He pulled out his small leather notebook, opened to the first page, and read his mother's words once more, Son, one day you will sit where they say you cannot. And when you do, keep your head high. He smiled softly, whispering, Mother, I kept my head high tonight. Outside, the emergency crews cleared the runway. The passengers began to prepare for departure, still glancing at Daniel with admiration. The attendants, too, looked at him differently now. They understood. The man they had tried to push aside was the man who had saved them all. As the cabin door opened and fresh air rushed in, Daniel stood once more. He let the passengers leave first, greeting them with nods, encouraging words, and a calm smile. Some shook his hand, others simply whispered, Thank you. When the cabin was nearly empty, Daniel walked down the aisle one last time. He paused, looking back at the rows of seats, the place where fear had been replaced with unity. He whispered, almost to himself, First class or economy, it does not matter. True class is how you lead when the world trembles. With that, he stepped off the plane, his shoulders high, his step steady. And though the night sky was dark, Daniel knew that the story of 12 minutes that changed everything would shine brighter than any light.